All right, my name is Waylon Lewis with Elephant Journal, and I am here with Eliot Brown, who is the co-author with Maureen Farrell of this book that I just mainlined into my brain over a few days, The Cult of We. So, Eliot, I'm sure you're sick of talking about it by now, but what is this book that you spent years of your life on?
I've not yet grown sick. Maybe
good.
Approaching it. So it's about the rise and fall of WeWork and the charismatic CEO behind it, and really how you could take something like insanely simple, which is office space, and boring, which is office space subleasing, and manage to convince the financial world that it is literally the country's most valuable startup, and it's actually a tech company. And actually really, poised to be super profitable. And then $40 billion could disappear. And someone could enrich himself by billions of dollars.
Yeah. And so to utter a sentence that no one has said for at least a couple of years in defense of Adam Neumann, I love co-work spaces. I love we have a bunch of we actually have a really boring WeWork here. But we have a bunch of cool indie spaces. I love community. I love going to farmers market, So the promise of co-work in defense of co-work is really exciting, and better than certainly Regis or whatever, a competitor who actually had their act together, who was actually a real business and was never similarly valued. He was able to sort of spin this magic sauce around WeWork where all these really smart people kind of fell under his spell and agreed to value it. I mean, I can't even conceive of these numbers. Like, what did it get to? 47 billion?
47 billion. So it was worth more than FedEx. It was two United Airlineses.
And then, to continue to be in defense of him is an impossible task. But when I look at a Regis or whatever, it's so boring. Like, there's nothing I would want to join in there. And so you look at the image of WeWork, your friends are there, people are partying and being hip and having a good time. So, but once you look under the hood, there was no there. There certainly wasn't technology to speak of. I mean, the more you look at WeWork, the business, and his acumen as a business leader, was there anything impressive about WeWork whatsoever?
So I think a lot of this WeWork is sort of the reason I became so interested in it is I'm a reporter for a Wall Street Journal, and covered real estate and then Silicon Valley. And it's just this total parable of the Silicon Valley startup economy, where one of the most important things that people out here in Silicon Valley sort of live for is valuation. That becomes sometimes extremely detached from the reality of a business. So WeWork was good at all the things you said. They were good at making spaces cool and architecture, and it's probably a more appealing place to work than any sort of sterile cubicle farm.
Did you ever work in a WeWork or have spent some time there?
Yeah, I've spent time there. We thought about writing some of the book from there, but then we're like, they'd have access to our Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, a co-working space is a co-working space, and you're only paying the rate of office space. You aren't paying some really high, rate that makes the company super profitable. And so,
but there's a great part in the book where you guys go through the actual technologies that they had kind of created, and it's clearly very little intelligence or focus had been applied to anything that might have qualified them to be called a technology company.
Yeah, you actually couldn't. So, but when when they imploded, they were a 9-year-old company, had, sold the world that they were a tech company and raised more money than any startup other than Uber. You could not rent a desk online. You had to go there in person or call on the phone.
Right.
And another sort of bit of the irony here is Adam Neumann, the CEO, is so charismatic and good at raising from tech investors. He couldn't use a computer, basically. It's because he was super dyslexic, but you had one of the most talented tech fundraisers ever, and his deputy, who wasn't dyslexic. Neither of them used computers.
Right.
And yet Yeah.
But to give people a little context, he wanted this crazy valuation. And so he had to kind of sell himself as maybe a technology company, not really a real estate company, because the valuations would be so different. Is that right?
Correct. So a tech company is just a software company is sort of this beautiful thing financially because you write the code and then when somebody buys it from you, you just ship them to some things through the internet tubes, some files, and you get profit because you've already written the software.
Once you've invested in the product, the distribution is practically free.
Yeah, the marginal cost is extremely low.
Right.
With real estate, every time you expand, you need to buy a new desk. You need to lease more space. You need to buy new glass and have somebody install it and have somebody clean it every day. So there's not this economies of scale that comes like a tech company. So real estate is valued at basically like 1/20th the amount that a tech company would have been valued, or that WeWork was being valued at. So they were off by a large margin.
So just recently, I'm sure you covered it, but I was reading some news alerts that Adam Neumann is once again considered a billionaire, like $1.6 billion. Like, how did he come out of this, golden? I mean, this guy, the greed that you described, and there's nothing wrong with making good money and living the life if you've been super successful, but his greed was a consistent theme above and beyond anything that made sense.
Yeah, totally.
How did he come out of this?
Personally, I didn't really even believe in the concept of greed before this book. I just kind of figured my philosophy was, well, if you're going to have a capitalist system, everyone should be expected that they will maximize, for themselves, and that's the system we elect, and so be it. But Adam really,
I hear a big but in this, coming down the highway. Yeah.
I mean, Adam taught me there are really different levels of that, and there are executives that are maximizing for value, and then Adam would do whatever it took basically to get more for himself. So I've never come across somebody so greedy. So he at multiple occasions was basically threatening to let the company do much worse or even go insolvent so he could get more money from his investors or the company itself. And so he did that at multiple turns. He took a lot of money out while he was CEO, which is never a great sign. I mean, he and his co-founder sold over $500 million of stock while CEO, and he borrowed another like $500 million. He had these various deals that enriched himself sort of in smaller numbers, but he was leasing 4 properties to the company. And he got in a lot of trouble by selling the trademark for the word "we" to the company for $6 million.
Right.
And
is that as bad as it sounds? Like, I'm sure Virgin, Virgin Airlines, Virgin this, Virgin that, like, they're trademarking, and that has a value, right?
The word, the trademark has a value. What it exposes, like, CEOs aren't supposed to profit personally from that.
Right. And like throughout your book, you're detailing how he was like, oh, I'm going to buy the building and then lease it to my own company. Like, he was trying to play both sides.
Right. In corporate America, the ideal is, and the norm is, that if you're a CEO of a company, you are working for the owners of that company, and like, you own some percent, but the rest of it is public shareholders. And so that's who you're aiming for. And you can't just then also strike this deal on the side. This is, I too will be getting money on top of this. I was listening to an Enron podcast, and it's a similar thing. Sorry.
What did you say?
I was just listening to a podcast on Enron, and there was this type of arrangement actually came up. So, it's not. I mean, it's legal, but it's not savory. And so Adam would do that again and again, and then in the end, sort of ends up as he's left with $1 to $2 billion, and meanwhile, investors have lost billions.
Not to mention his own employees, many of whom were sitting on their hands waiting to be able to sell stock and, counting on that, right? And a lot of them didn't do too well.
Totally. There's also these multiple examples along the way where once he sold stock at one price, doesn't want employees to know, and then allows employees to sell stock at a much lower price. And then later on, employees sort of had been always sticking with the company for years under this idea that once it IPOs, everyone's going to get really rich. That was what Adam always told them.
Right.
And then, the value plunges, nobody gets rich except for Adam.
So again, the phrase that no one in their right mind would utter in defense of Adam Neumann, he was kind of playing the system that he saw, right? He saw that profits didn't matter at all, that the only thing that mattered was revenue and valuation. And he just went to town on that, just shamelessly. So people understand, often a company will try to become profitable before going public, or at least show a good direction, but they weren't even in the ballpark, right?
Yeah, totally. They were losing consistently $1 for every dollar they took in. So they were spending $2 for every dollar they took in, which that's sort of fine at first. But when you're 9 years old,
you're trying to grow, maybe it's a good investment. But they were 9 years in.
Yeah, and it would double every year, right? So it's like, oh, you're losing $350 million, but by 2019 it was like $2 billion, and then it was going to be $4 billion.
So one thing I loved in your book is you reflected a little bit, maybe toward the end of the book, did the system learn anything from this? Did investors learn anything from this? And the answer is generally no, right?
A hard no. I mean, I don't think that today, like, you'll see a $40 billion co-working company, like that's one thing they've learned not to do. But generally, founders are like the age of the founder is alive and well. I mean, I just wrote a story for the Journal about how founders on boards that they control are getting paid, essentially paying themselves, or having a friendly board pay them hundreds of millions of dollars in just extra stock, which is this totally new trend. So startup CEOs are now being paid more than the CEO of Google. This is very Adam Neumann like, but it's become, he was sort of early on it, but it's part of the water out here, because
and you see that even with relatively well-known and mature companies, right?
Yeah, I mean, so these types of awards are happening to companies with names like Palantir, which is another. It's like a 15-year-old company, but it's still new to the public markets. GoodRx was a big one. It's these sort of late stage startups that are large, but not, GoodRx is like I don't know, I'm going to get this wrong, like $15 billion company. And the CEOs each made about as much as the CEO of Alphabet, which is a $1.5 trillion company. So it's the era of the founder is still well. Then you see all these kind of like crazy electric vehicle companies that don't have any revenue and are just putting out these projections for like
the Nikola one Nikola existed, right?
Yeah, that was like a WeWork on fast forward, where the CEO has now been indicted for fraud. The company is still worth like $5 billion and still hasn't produced anything. Investors are just like really into the promise of growth.
Right. It's just become like a casino. I mean, it's not necessarily tied to any kind of reality.
Yeah, I think it's just like there's so much money trying to get in, because if you do get the next Google, then it works out. But then that type of mindset really justifies anything, right? Like,
or the next Elon Musk, Tesla, Rocket X, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, Tesla's sort of a kind of similar story where they produce cars and have a tech valuation. But maybe for another day.
Yeah. At least they've, come through many hard years and actually created something pretty innovative and
they're profitable.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely another interesting, crazy founder there. So I want to kind of share my notes here. It's like a great word cloud. It's like inefficient, incompetent, greedy, billionaire, Lance Armstrong, hate game, not player, romance, community, special sauce, B Corp, alcohol, all the repeated like tequila shots in the plastic cups. You're like, any business, we're in an environmental kind of focused business, like any business that is repeatedly pushing little plastic throwaway single-use cups for tequila, you're like, all your talk about sustainability, WeWork. Come on. industrious. Like, so do you think there will, maybe this isn't an interesting question, but it's interesting to me. Like, do you see an industrious or someone like making it, do you see that co-work actually is a viable path for someone who pays attention to running a good business to make billions of dollars?
A viable path, yes. To billions of dollars, no. I mean, it's just, it is it's just sort of a financial question. It's like the profit that you can get from this based on the investment is only like this. And so it doesn't justify anyone giving you like $50 billion tomorrow to do it.
Like Son. Is that how you say his name? Son?
Son, yeah.
Son.
Yeah,
yeah, so he gets this like legendary investment from, what's his name again?
Masayoshi Son.
Yeah, thank you.
Masa.
And you know, they're talking about, what were they talking about? 10 trillion, 1 trillion?
Yeah. So the idea was, you know, they were in 2018 talking about what would have been the largest ever buyout of a startup. And they were going to buy half of WeWork for like $20 billion. And the plan that they were literally sketching out on iPads was to make a $10 trillion company within 10 years. And you know, at the time, Apple hadn't even surpassed $1 trillion in its size. So they were talking about what would have been by far the largest company on earth.
Right.
Or most valuable company on earth, and just sort of like casually writing it down. It's like, yeah, you know, you'll get this many millions of users by then. And you know, then Adam would have been worth at that like $5 trillion was sort of his plan.
And Adam was like a pretty crazy, wild founder. And Son's advice to him was be crazier, right? Go, you know.
Yeah. So they go in sort of before that discussion, they go to, Adam goes to Tokyo to visit Masa, and Masa sits him down with the CEO of Didi, the Uber of China, and says, do you want to know why, you know, Sheng Wei here beat Travis Kalanick from Uber in China? It wasn't because he was smarter, it's because he was crazier. And like the lesson is like, you need to be more crazy. And then Adam, like the people who were sitting around him are like, this is the craziest guy I know. And like Adam even said that. He's like, I'm pretty crazy. But then he is now taught to be crazier. And so then he starts coming up with all these ideas of like, well, we should buy Lyft. We should buy Sweetgreen. You know, we should buy Clear. Like he just wanted to sort of go on these.
And they did. They bought a bunch of like, he bought the Wave. He invested in the Wave pool. You know, things that don't have any real clear connection. He invested heavily in one of my favorite things, like 2 vegan creamers.
Coffee creamers, yeah. Non-dairy coffee creamer companies.
Like
an enormous amount of money, no less. Like they put like over $25 million into Laird superfood. Which was...
And that, ironically, that was one of the few that did well, right?
It did okay. Like not like if you just invested in the NASDAQ, I think it would have done much better, but it didn't go to zero.
Yeah. So I just want to read a great line in the New York Times review, which is a big fan of your book, The Cult of We. Quote, but clearly my thirst was not quenched. They're talking about the documentaries, other coverage, because I guzzled Brown and Farrell's The Cult of We the way Newman might gulp bottled water after smoking so much pot on a private jet that flight attendants would reach for their air masks. This actually happened. So, yeah, I have to say this, you know, I watched the documentary, I read your book. I don't know what it is about this story, but it feels like fiction. It feels like F. Scott Fitzgerald, or, you know, the rise and fall of some ridiculous hero or anti-hero, I guess. It's just a pure mythic human story that just happened. I mean, half the stories you're talking about, I kept looking at the calendar being like, that's 3 years ago. And he was still riding high.
Yeah, it's honestly, my co-author Maureen and I our process was usually like calling each other and being like, "You will not guess what I just learned," and that would just keep going on. It's like we'd continue to be surprised at how surprised we were by kind of like these crazy stories about. It's like he was trying to be a caricature of in a fiction book about. It's like, well, crazy startup CEOs must use jets a lot. So now I'm going to go on jets. I'm going to party on all of them. I'm going to keep destroying them. So like the private jet company has to take them out of service. Then I'm going to buy my own. I'm going to hot boxes so the pilots need to put on gas masks. I mean, it's like...
Yeah. Like Elephant Journal, you know, we have many millions of readers and billions of social fans. And we've done some good things over the years. We're 19 years old, and we're counting every dollar we have, like a lot of media. Like, we're so careful with what we do. And I'm reading this book, and he's like, what was the jet? $23 million?
63.
63.
So,
and
then, with his personal wealth, it was like, this stuff where he would, they moved to California once for a few months, and like their hairdresser came with them. Right. They had 3 nannies for 5 children. They had the surf coach's family, a nanny for the surf coach. Like, I mean, it was the
whole was it the Maldives?
The Maldives, yeah.
Maldives, thank you. I've never been. Clearly, I can't afford to go. The Maldives. I don't even know how to say it. And he had a yacht. He brought the surf coach and all the surf coaches.
So it's a 40th birthday, and he brings all his friends from around the world, and then he even is there for like a week or 2 weeks, and needs a presentation on the IPO. So has a WeWork staffer fly literally around the world. I mean, it's in the Indian Ocean, and it's not like there's too many direct flights from Newark or something. And so then this guy, he has to go there to like meet him on this 230-foot yacht to give a presentation.
And barely gave him time half the time when he was having people fly around. Often he wouldn't even show up, or he'd keep him waiting for hours. I mean, it's a delicious read. I do want to say that the places where I gave him credit is, I'm a big believer in the B Corp kind of thing, like companies that are trying to do well and do good, companies that are trying to bring some romance and mission back. And that's exactly where I also blame him most thoroughly, is he kind of gave a bad name to mission, because we're always talking about our mission, but we actually mean it.
Yeah, this is, as like a Silicon Valley reporter, this is something I struggle with, and I'm pretty cynical. So sort of I see
Silicon Valley, the show itself, like the running joke is, we want to make a better world, right?
Yeah, we want to make the world a better place. And then Adam would say the same exact things in sort of
without
the same way.
And
like he really did think, or he seemed to think, and then got people who were working there to really believe that they were really, the word was, elevating the world's consciousness, and making the world a better place through whatever they were doing, which is subleasing office space. And I mean, to me, I think it's just so ubiquitous in Silicon Valley that everyone says that now, that it's made it lose meaning, which is too bad, because they're clearly, like, inherently, some companies actually are doing good and really care about that. And then others think they care about that, but are really making ad tech or subleasing office space.
Exactly. There's
so I don't know how
companies, not enough, but there's so many companies that do some real good. Maybe it's not flashy, but it's Bo Burlingham, he wrote the book Small Giants. Like that book, the entire book is full of these companies who actually give a care, not in some kind of tacky, gross way. They're actually trying to do some good and create a quality product and treat their employees well, and all of which is important. So I think I had one final thing. Where was it? It feels a bit like the story of Icarus. Like, this guy just was shameless. He went too high, too fast, and like a pyramid scheme on some level. Like, he, at some point, you knew he had to, reality was going to call. Like, how, in his mind, what was his game plan? To do the valuation, then retire?
That one's always sort of stumped me. I mean, I think that my guess is he sort of convinced himself, he drank his own Kool-Aid. And, was so sort of good at the early stage of being telling people, oh, it's going to hit $1 billion in valuation. And then, it actually happens. And then he was like, well, no, it's going to hit $5 billion. And then that happens. And so then he must have really convinced himself anything was possible, even though it was all this kind of paper mache empire. And so, Icarus is one we bring up. And then, at least when we think about it, and then it was an Emperor's New Clothes story too, where everyone around him was seeing this thing as a tech company, and no one really looked at themselves and be like, well, it does seem to lose, $2 or spend $2 for every dollar they take in. And then one day, the emperor went on parade and everybody sort of saw it and it crumbled down.
Right. Yeah. Well, I hope everyone checks out Small Giants. It's a great book. I hope everyone checks out The Cult of We, the book we're talking about. And checks out B Corps, because there are companies who are trying to do a good job responsibly, hopefully not BSing people. And man, what a read. I read this. I could not, I, like most people, struggle to read half the time these days. It's so sad.
Same.
I have like 80 channels and, blah, blah, blah in my phone. But this book, I just, it could have been twice as long and I would have read the whole thing. It reads like a novel, and, you two should be so proud. And you also covered a lot of this live, like when it was going down.
Yeah, no. I mean, we're the reason WeWork ended when it did. One reason is because of a story I wrote. And it was good journalism. Like, it didn't feel like you had it out for, like, it felt fair, and the fair picture of what was happening was unbelievably awful. But it didn't feel like you had it out for him unfairly. Like, I felt like, all the people, and you've said it yourself, like on some level, it's just subleasing. On the other hand, creating community, co-work is exciting. But yeah, he got high on his own Kool-Aid. How could he not, with all the money that was being thrown at him? But he was better than most at getting it to be thrown at him as well. Yes, he was probably the world's best salesman, is one of the things I'll say. So.
Awesome, Eliot. Well, thank you for your time. And everyone go out and get this book. It's amazing. The Cult of We by Eliot Brown and Farrell.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did.